So, realistically, when you're talking about naval history, there is one word which comes up more often than not in discussions. Frigate. Now, I have to say, speaking as a lifelong believer that you can make any word sound like a curse word if you pronounce it in the right way, and I think I'm proved true, especially with the word frigate, or frigate it. This is a very attractive word to me, because it does roll off the tongue. Today we're talking about the first ships which were not just frigate built, but were frigates. And you have to remember there's a difference, because there are ships of the line and ships which were frigate built. So they were built with a frigate style structure, and that's actually the development and technological development which leads to this whole rating system and leads to all the ships in this. But they're frigate built because of their hull shaping and their keel design, etc., and how they're designed to move through the water. They're not frigates. Frigates are vessels which take that to the extreme, which take it to the ultimate, which are entirely focused around this style of operation. This is not live, it's a recording. You want a biscuit? 1 second. So it seems rather appropriate that we've now reached the point at which we're actually looking at the frigates. But here's the funny thing. Frigates aren't the middle of the age of sail, they aren't the middle of the ratings. They're actually towards the bottom. They're fifth rates. And while sixth rates occasionally were also called frigates, usually brigs to an extent, or post ships, and more normally you'd find most types of brig were below the sixth rates, were in unrated category. Rating basically means they get a full captain. That's why a sixth rate would also be called a post ship, because they'd actually have a captain posted to them. Their captain would not be a commander or a master and commander, as they often had double duty as both the sailing master and the captain. So yeah, let's look at these frigates. Now, the Royal Navy is a good example to give here as an example of what the proportions are like in most forces you're looking at. And in most of the forces you're looking at, the Royal Navy, of course, has a tremendous preponderance once you look at third and fifth rates. They have 103 third rates in Commission 1814 and 134 fifth rates. The only group which is bigger than them is the unrated class. Sloops of war, gun brigs, cutters or schooners. Those sort of ships which are 18 guns or below, broadly speaking. They have 360 of those in commission. They're the class which, when you look at it and when you look at all the numbers, actually make up more and provide more hulls for the Royal Navy than anything else. But they fulfill a whole razzmatazz of duties, realistically. So when we get on them, that's going to be a very interesting discussion. As it is, what exactly does 25 post ships, or sixth rates, we're getting up to? But in reality, in this period, it is the third rates and the fifth rates which are doing the bulk of the war work. The bulk of the war work, as in the offensive war. If you're looking for a ship to be your frigate for a battle, you want a fifth rate, if you can have it. If you're looking for a ship to go off independent cruising, you're looking again for a fifth rate. If you're looking for a ship which is going to form a part of a squadron with ships like it to go hunting for enemy merchant convoys, you're looking at the fifth rates. Just like the third rates are the ships which you look at if you want to form a battle fleet, the fifth rates are the ships you want to look at if you want to go and do anything which is heavy duty guerre de course or guerre de vol. That's the reality of what you're looking at. So, ships in service. There's a lot of fifth rates there. They are a critical asset, and they're also the ships which most commonly, when I put the pictures up, people will claim they know all about them. But actually, they're quite a varied class, because honestly, the reality of them is that they're quite homogeneous in terms of what's in them, but they're quite varied in terms of how countries create them, because You need their roles they're going to do, the balance of missions you're going to have them do, reflect each nation's individual needs and each nation's strategic points. So they're often the ones which have the greatest level of diversity, i.e. the ones which are most likely going to fit or not going to fit if you capture them from another navy. With that being said, okay, I'm just going to apologise that the chair is not designed to have two large bodies sitting in it, one of whom decides to keep moving and rocking everything instead of just sleeping. So that's why it's talking the whole time. Apologies. So what's the standard form of a frigate? Well, a complete battery, i.e. one complete gun deck. You might have two gun decks specifically in terms of its design, but the guns are mostly, there's going to be only one deck which actually is a complete full-length battery. The other guns will normally be broken in the waist. There might be some in the forecastle, some aft, etc. But that's going to be their sort of form. And the reason they are given this form and given this structure is seakeeping. You try and fit too many guns in there, they're not going to size a hull, they're not going to have the buoyancy necessary to keep themselves in the weathers they're going to be out in. Because, again, frigates, fifth rates, are going to be cruising the world's oceans. You're going to be taking them into the South Atlantic, you're going to take them deep into the Indian Ocean, into the Pacific. You're going to be taking them a long way from home when they are all you have. You want some buoyancy in that vessel. You want a hull which is going to take a pounding and keep going on, and that pounding is mostly going to come from Mother Nature. Because whilst you might find yourself fighting a war, the odds are the sea will be fighting you 24/7, 365. A battle comes and goes. They happen. They're not the constant. The sea, that's ever present. Good example here. I looked hard to try and find a decent picture and a decent plan of vessels of the same class. Is Niger here and Alarm, which are from the Niger class. Now, I couldn't find a picture of Niger herself, which was actually decent, but as they're built to the same design, and they're built by the Royal Navy, so they're very much built to the same design, this actually does work. And you can see quite how like an iceberg a fifth rate is. When you look at the hull, you look at what's above water and what's below the waterline. When you look at the gun deck and the way it's positioned along the hull, how the gun's positioned, how the mast's positioned. This is a vessel built for speed, built for maneuverability, but most of all it's built for its own version of survivability, which is against the sea. The sea is that ever-present threat. And 32 guns? Yeah. That's about the entry level for a fifth rate. The Royal Navy and the French both seem to kind of like the 38 gun at certain points, which is about mid-level. Usually if you're going on to 44 guns, you're looking at a pretty big, pretty tough fifth rate. And also you have to remember, these numbers are what they're pierced for. Okay, these are the number of proper gun positions they have. They might carry carronades on top of that. They might carry other smaller cannon. They might cover all sorts of things which they can mount on their top deck if they have the weight space they think they can get away with them. Now, it depends to the extent on the Navy and on the ship whether they do think they can get away with that. If you're talking the US Navy, which tends to build especially its large frigates out of heavier timbers, and we'll get into those in a second, well, they have a reasoning for how they deploy them and what they're going to load them with. If you're talking about the Royal Navy, which is, how do I put this politely, emphasizing number of ships, quantity, over individual ship quality, because it needs these ships, as many as it can possibly get. This is about mass. This is about numbers, not about who has individually the best ship as far as the Royal Navy is concerned. You're not ordering, if you're ordering hundreds of something, you're not going, oh, how does it rank on against this opponent who's ordering like 5 of them? Oh, it's not as good as theirs. Oh, that's something we're going to worry about. No, because you're going, well, that's good. And the plan in any war is we turn up with at least 4 of ours for any one of theirs. Or alternatively, we are also ordering third rates by the dozen as well. Cute. So that's the scenario. But if you're a smaller power, who has a small navy, you might well go, well, I want my 5th rates to be as powerful as they possibly can, because these ships count. They might not be ships of the line, but if they are large enough and powerful enough that they're going to require a ship of the line to deal with them, with assurance, they have an impact on their opponents. They have an impact on their strategic thinking. They require them to measure them in their balance. They can't just go, frigate. We can deal with that. They have to think, what do we have to deal with it? Hey, Big Fluff. And with that, we reached the Shameless Book Plug. So, Shameless Book Plug, what's this? This is the quick section in every video where I say thank you for your support of the channel, thank you for liking, sharing and subscribing, thank you for helping making the channel grow, thank you for allowing me to reach more people with naval history. Hope you enjoy the videos, and yeah, I publish books. I am a naval historian, and thanks to your funding, after all, that's what the channel's sort of money supports, I'm able to be a naval historian and publish books. Because, yeah, it's not the research which costs money, or the time, or the writing, or the going into the archives. They cost money, but it's not an excessive amount. It's the pictures for the books. It's the pictures for the books, and it's thanks to you I'm able to put them together. It's thanks to you I'm able to do that. So there are more books coming, and that's all thanks to your support and your kindness, so thank you. Can I get to my mouse, please? Thank you. Keep sticking his nose underneath my hand, but I can't reach the mouse. I should admit he's being a little bit needy today, because he went to the hairdressers on Wednesday, and he's had a cut, so he's had a trim, so he's feeling a bit cold. So I apologise if he's being more than normal. He's just a bit needy. So why frigate? Well, the word comes from the Dutch, frigate, which, as I said, it was the Dutch that inspired it, and the Scottish and English who ended up in a construction race which created it. The whole system of ships, which eventually would become the Raider system. The whole, all those ships. But realistically, it's always been the 5th rate that is the frigate. It's always been the 5th rate that is the ship which most epitomizes its era. When if we talk about the age of sail, normally we talk about a frigate. Normally we have a picture of a frigate behind us. So why is this? Because these ships were in many ways the most attractive parts of it. Okay? We're talking about the medieval era and warfare in the medieval era. People often imagine knights, and they forget that knights were the centers of whole units, and they were just a component of the battlefield strength. It's all about knights, it's all about the chivalry. We talk about Rome, people picture legionary. They don't picture their navy, they don't picture all their auxiliaries, they picture the legionary. And it's similar to the Age of Sail. When you picture the Age of Sail, you picture a frigate. You picture the ship sailing on its own into the deep blue sea, voyaging out to find the enemy, to find trade, to find booty. Treasure. And they're not wrong, but just like most things in history, when we start trying to limit things down to a single image, it doesn't give you an accurate opinion of it. It doesn't give you an accurate impression. You see, wars are always combined arms. Naval warfare, land warfare, battles, etc., are combined arms. You will get individual battles, and they will be the stuff of legends, the frigate duels, the duels between knights. These are the stuff of legends people get to write around. Mainly they get right about them because they take place at periods when nothing else much is going on, so people have the opportunity to talk to them, and B, they allow for personal heroism far more than any other story. When you've got a big battle fleet engaging, there's a reason why Nelson sticks out after the battle, where he uses one ship, boards one ship, and then uses that ship as a bridge to board another. Because it's a really cool piece, a really random bit of history, never been done before in the middle of a big battle. It sticks out as personal heroism. People have always been attracted to tales of personal heroism. They've always been looking for the exemplar, the ideal, the thing to aim to be like. And so frigate captains were this. More importantly, with frigates sailing as they were, unencumbered by fleet, unencumbered by other structures, you could earn really massive money from prizes. You're not part of an admiral's squadron. You're sailing independently. Might be part of an admiral's station or something like that, but you're going to have to share that money with much less people if you get prize money. And you've got more chance of getting prize money because you can decide what you take on. You can decide what you hunt down. You are just in there to get it, and that's what you're doing. Captains can become incredibly rich in the age of sail with a frigate. There are captains who fought tooth and nail to stay in charge of a fifth rate. You want me to command a third rate? No, sir. I'll keep the fifth rate. A third rate might be a grand ship of the line, allow you to take part in battles, be powerfully in charge. But a fifth rate, independent cruising, that's where you can make your money. So they were assets. They also made money and paid for themselves with the navies often. When you look at the money brought into the navies by the ships they captured and the ships they saved, they more than paid for themselves. They were a very profitable, or to use a Terry Pratchett phrase, self-financing portion of the Royal Navy, and of any other navy. The Americans in the War of 1812 found this out to be the case. They were very self-financing with frigates, which makes their later eschewment of cruisers in favour of battleships by the time you get to the 1900s slightly strange. Slightly unexpected, but there again, that's the US Congress for you. So let's consider the heavy frigates as we're talking about the Americans. But the whole point, and this is something which cannot be overemphasized, is that fifth rates, rather like third rates, represent an excellent price point on the ship construction scale. And I know I keep emphasizing this, but when you're building a large fleet, this really does matter. And when you're building a navy at all, this really does matter. It's got about what's the scales of economies. There's a reason why when we're talking about warships these days, and modern warships, when you're looking at a ship which is going to go around the world and do lots of operations around the world, you're usually looking at something in the usually 6,000 to 10,000 ton range. Which, if you look in the 1920s and 30s, was roughly the cruiser range, which were the ships which were going around the world, being representatives of the navies. If you look at the period before that, when we're looking at the sort of once we get to sort of steel constructed ships and the ships which are going around the world with their own power and engines, that's what we're looking at, because that's a price point. I would say, to an extent, the fifth rate price point is probably about the 6,000 ton range. It will go around the world, it will do everything, but it's got the minimum facilities. 10,000 tons, probably to about 12,000, it's probably about 6 to about 7,500 tons, and it's probably about 10 to 12.5, depending on how you configure the ship, is probably about the third rate range. Okay? And realistically, that makes sense, because if you look historically, what we're talking about are ships which had an extra gun deck, were roughly twice the firepower of the fifth rate. So roughly, third rate's roughly twice the firepower of a fifth rate, because a fifth rate is roughly 32 to 44 guns, and a third rate's 64 to 80 guns. And it's an extra full-length gun deck. It's a price point. This is economical for the best value for money you can get from a single gun deck. Single continuous gun deck. This is the best value money from 2 gun decks. 3 is getting pretty expensive. But once you start looking at it, you start to realise that, well, hang on, the price point has shifted, and it looks like the first rates are better value for money than the second rates. And that doesn't really surprise me. Especially as the first rates grow increasingly more powerful. And they're about 3 times the size, roughly, of our fifth rate. Also tells you what the next economical price point for a surface ship is, and if you start to look at it, you go, oh, there quite a lot have historically fitted in that roughly that weight bracket of, oh, roughly, you got 6 to 7.5, got 10 to 12, slightly expanded sort of a range, and then you go up a bit more and you go, it's roughly about 16 to 18. Yeah, those are the rough again. The capability, what happened with the capability, what in terms of what capability you're getting, it's now worth it for the extra money it's going to cost. It's enough of a capability advantage over the previous vessels that it's worthwhile investing in. And then we drop down to these, and they're about, 16 to 18 guns. That's about half. Again. And there again, next largest number of ships. So, it's price points. And it doesn't matter whether you're a small navy or a large navy, those price points are going to roughly stay the same. What's going to happen is the variations on them. And of course, the biggest variation that we often hear about when it comes to the fifth rate frigates are the Americans' heavy frigates. Sometimes people like to call them the super heavies. Now, they're what happens when you want to build something which absolutely, definitely is going to outclass every single vessel in its classification. And they will. One-on-one, they should win the fight, because they have heavier timbers than most frigates. They do not have timbers at the same level of a ship of the line. I'm talking a third rate or higher. They're not that thick. They're thick, but not that thick. They're heavy, but not that heavy. It's not probably going to be heavier or more powerful than a Razé ship of the line, which has been converted into usually a fifth rate. By cutting down a gun deck. Those things are astronomically tough, but they're also something which you don't want to do a lot of, because pretty much a ship of the line is probably more useful overall for most scenarios. The only advantage of a Razé is that if your opponent has a heavy frigate and you absolutely necessarily need to be able to go toe-to-toe to it wandering around the world, the Razé will probably Razé can match up and go, hello, I'm about the only thing that can eat you for dinner. If you want to get me to give a sort of more modern example, think about as a heavy frigate being, I don't know, I don't want to say Panzerschiff because they're better than that. They're better than the Deutschland class in terms of their value, but we're talking that sort of thing. That Deutschland class was a heavy cruiser which had 11-inch guns. That's, on paper, very scary. And you're probably going to need multiple other cruisers to fight it evenly, like the British did at the Battle of Riven Plate, to be able to make sure that you are going to take down its firepower. Although with only 6 low-range guns, it kind of limits itself. Okay, that affects its rate of fire and all sorts of things, and means that it actually is not as powerful as or as capable as they are. But it's a closer position for people to be to think about and be anomalous with. And the Razay equivalent would be if, I don't know, the World War One Courageous and Glorious in their large light cruiser form had been kept around and modernised. So they're floating around with 15-inch guns. It was a case of, oh, frigate, you're a larger version of me. You completely only make sense to kill me. Ouch! They're also useful, Razays, for dealing with certain issues off the French coast when you're doing those operations. There is a reason the Royal Navy has a couple of them, but they don't have many. They don't do a lot of Razaying for that reason, and they don't build frigates specifically for that. Why? Because whilst it's at the same price point for the Americans to go for the heavy cruiser, a heavy frigate, and the British to go for a regular version, the British are building, as I said, hundreds of them. They are literally churning them out. They are a frigate factory, to use a modern phrase. The Americans are building these. And they're not building just a line. They keep looking at it and they don't actually get round to building it. They keep talking about it and they don't actually get round to building them. They eventually build some, but they really don't build a lot of ships to the line. And they have practically none for the War of 1812 to 1814. To such an extent that the moment the British ships of the line turn up, that basically goes, oh, the naval war's over. The moment the British have ships of the line sitting off their harbours and going, and nothing wants to come out and fight us? No. No, because it doesn't matter how good your heavy frigate is. It doesn't matter how much it can win a fight against an equivalent frigate. A ship of the line turns up and it's, you've got more firepower, you're able to fire down on me, you've got thicker walls, and even worse, they brought 2 of you. It's, to go back to this figure, this problem. There's a reason the British have almost as many, and if you look at it consistently, they always have pretty much as many third rates in commission as they do fifth rates. There's a slight difference. In this case, there's 31 more fifth rates in commission than third rates, and earlier there's 7 more fifth rates in commission than third rates. But there's a reason for that. These extra fifth rates basically are the War of 1812. You need more frigates running around the world because you're dealing with American privateers and going around, especially to protect the spacey movements of silver and all those things. But this also reflects the Americans, because guess what's sitting off their harbours? Because it's a very easy win for the British. They have the third rates. They have that price point. And it's the same for most powers. If you're going to build something, you're going to build a fifth rate or a third rate, because of the price point. Because for one value, this gives you the most power you can probably get from a single gun deck, and it works. It works. And so you have some interesting stories with these fifth rates. You often have fifth rates having individual fights, and one of my favourite is Constellation versus Insurgent. Now, this took place in 1799 during the Quasi-War, which was an interesting conflict of roughly 2 years between the French and the USN, and both these ships are fifth rates. The Constellation is a 38-gun fifth rate. The Insurgent is a 40-gun Semilante class frigate, fifth rate, of the French Navy. And pretty much it takes place as a result of the privateering and other things that have been going on from the French against the Americans. There were issues. There are problems. The Quasi-War is a whole special war, and it's a whole undeclared but actually happening war. It's one of those interesting things, because basically the Americans had failed to repay their debts to France during the war, which they'd incurred during the War of Independence, and so the French sold rights to privateer on American vessels to get their money back. Yeah, it is basically debt collection with navies. What can I say? The 18th and 19th centuries are wild. They're wild, man. Some of the things you can get sent on by as a navy, you never get allowed to do that today. So sad. So sad. You know, navies would get far better funding if the treasuries felt that they were going to be part of their debt collection service. Suddenly you would have no arguments over, we want a new carrier. Now you can have 3. You got the money off them? Yeah. Good. Just imagine it now. So, basically, Commodore Thomas Truxtun has been sent out to cruise between Puerto Rico, St. Kitts, and try and prevent the privateers from reclaiming the money. Constellation was his flagship. He was supported by the Baltimore and the Richmond and the Norfolk and the Revenue Cutter Virginia. Richmond and Norfolk are brigs. Baltimore's 20 guns. Baltimore is intriguing, just about probably counts as a sloop of war, but yeah, we'll leave that to one side. Now, the French had vessels based from Guadeloupe, and they included not just the privateers, but also some French frigates and a corvette. That was also 20 guns. The difference between corvettes and the sloop of war is, to be honest, a bit of hull shaping, but also name designation. It's one of those scenarios where you're looking at going, there is difference going on, but it's so subtle, it might as well not be there. Now, this is a bit of an interesting battle because, well, they're having fun. There's been storms, there's all sorts of fun with the weather going on. Basically, the North Atlantic and Caribbean being the North Atlantic and Caribbean when it feels like it, and it is February after all, so it's winter time. It's fun. On 9th of February, a Constellation sighted the insurgent, and Truxtun, who's the captain of the Constellation, double shot his cannon. The reason he does that, the reason I mention that is because he's going to close to quite short range. He's going to get to 50 yards. And the reason he's done that is because double-shotted cannon can give him a lot of advantage. Later on after the action, by the way, he gets a 24-pounders removed and replaced with 18-pounders because he's found 24-pounders that unreliable. So it's kind of a really interesting thing, and that they're theoretically giving him this edge, but yeah, the 24-pounders were unreliable. He doesn't really like them. Now, as he approached, he actually displayed British signals and then as displayed American signals. He wasn't sure who he was approaching, so he was trying to fox them, pretending to be British. And, well, the insurgent decided to replace her American colours with French and fired a gun. The French had thought that she was a British corvette and had decided to avoid her, a British ship. I'm not quite sure why he felt a British corvette and he was avoiding, because the British don't really have corvettes at this point, and the corvette would be a smaller ship than him. So I'm presuming he felt it was a British frigate. And in which case he was trying to avoid her, probably because he was worried just about how interested in prize money the British were at this time. But he's actually going to end up being the first ever victory of a U.S. naval vessel over a foreign naval vessel, the first ever capture, and the first ever prize for the U.S. Navy. Although, here's the thing. Their Secretary of Navy actually negotiates the price down from $120,000 to $84,000 and thinks that's a good thing. Yeah, it's great. My crews risked all their lives to get this ship, and I've saved $36,000 in getting a new ship for the US Navy on the valuation we were originally given. There's a reason why the Royal Navy, once the price was settled, the price was paid. There was no good negotiation afterwards. It kept the crews motivated and made sure that everything was honestly done. And also meant the crews were motivated to really put their best into making the ship look as valuable as possible and be as high quality as possible. So I'm a bit disappointed with the US on, I have to admit, after this incident. But anyway, it's a fun battle because... I know you can say it's a fun battle because we're looking back in the past, well, people died. There are... which is always never a good thing, but it's a fun battle because of the actions. At about 1:30 PM, they're in a bit of a storm. Insurgent has her main topmast severely damaged. Constellation is doing pretty well. And so they managed to get into a fighting position. Truxton, on the Constellation, originally has the weather gauge, which is theoretically an advantageous position. But when the winds are strong enough, it actually is resulting in her heeling on her leeward side, so that the gunports can't actually be opened. And those were the gunports which were facing the facing the Insurgent. So he needs to concede the weather gauge so he can actually fire at his opponent. Because having the advantage of the wind is actually disadvantaging him. Now, with that the case, well, the Insurgent managed to try to sort of communicating with the Constellation, trying to sort of avoid fighting them, but the US aren't feeling that way. You know, you've been preying on our merchant ships. Yes, we owe you money, but we're not going to give it to you when on the front of madnesses. We have our own people to protect. And they actually managed to get, and because of the French attempts to communicate, they get to 50 yards before they have to open up a fire. And so the double shot of the 24-pounders rips through the quarterdeck of the Insurgent. The French managed to return fire, and they managed to damage the mast, which, frankly, they are saved from the damage becoming worse by the actions of David Porter, who was in the rigging and managed to cut away the bits that need to be cut to relieve the pressure it was causing. But the reality is, thanks to the damage that the Insurgent had already received from the storm earlier, meant that Constellation was able to dodge all her clumsy attempts at boarding. She had a larger crew, so theoretically closing was in her advantage, but that's only if she could actually manage to board. Constellation managed to rake the Insurgent's bow and, full broadside, which does a huge amount of damage to the ship and really is not a good position to be in. And they fired another broadside into her starboard side and, carried on managing to get the fire in. They even slipped again across her bow and rake her a second time. They disabled most of the Insurgent's 18-pounder guns. Her 24-pounder guns are still proving unreliable, but they're working. Just about. And after they crossed the Insurgent a third time, they struck their colours and surrendered. And as said, the rest is a fun storm getting the ship back, and how their officers of the Constellation managed to get the Insurgent back with about 170 prisoners aboard. But I still say the worst thing is Secretary of Navy Benjamin Stoddart. Now, the point I'd like to make about him is that somehow he managed to get 2 destroyers named after him. Honestly, I don't think you can get the Royal Navy to name a ship after a Lord of the Admiralty who had stiffed people for prize money. There must be a slightly different culture going on here, but this always confuses me every time I look at this piece of history. Honestly, that would be one of the naval secretaries who would never get a ship named for them if transposed Royal Navy culture over to the US Navy. There'd always be a reason that ship would not get that name. There would be a constant list of very plausible, very good, very true reasons of why this ship is not getting that name. Even politicians who the Navy likes, they don't necessarily give names to. A.k.a. why does HMS Pitt never exist? Because of what the sailors were turned to. And so, the fifth rate continues. it's been involved in many actions. I gave the Constellation vs. Insurgent because it's a fun one to give. There are so many of them. Which one to pick from, and I decided to go with that one because it's America's first. It's rather a cute one. Rather a nice piece of history. And, well, the thing is, the fifth rate actually lasts longer than in service than the third rates and others in terms of full-on military service, because technically HMS Warrior and a lot of the ships like her were fifth rates. A lot of the ironclad frigates, which are the battleships of their day, are fifth rates, if you consider the number of guns and the fact they have one continuous gun deck. And a few guns on the top, up above, but one continuous gun deck. In fact, most of the central battery ships, let's be honest, they are fifth-rate frigates. It's just, it's not unexpected or unusual. It's because, again, it's a price point. At this point, guns had got expensive enough, guns had got powerful enough, that did you need to build that second gun deck? Here's the thing. Did HMS Warrior suffer in her capabilities to project power by not being an equivalent to a third rate, by not having that second gun deck? I would argue no. You could have built it bigger. You could have taken that hull and scaled it up. It would have been heavy. It would have been some very interesting naval architecture. But it's a possibility to do. It would have made her into a third rate. But does she need that firepower? At a certain point, even the most powerful nations in the world have a limitation on them. Sometimes I do, for this channel, alternate histories. When people ask them in Patreon, and I can make them work and deliver some interesting historical points. And the one I did recently was what happens if the Royal Navy goes DARPA, and how I arranged it was the Royal Navy's version of DARPA. Basically, I took the often mooted Third Sea Lords discretionary funds, which when you look at some of the Third Sea Lords, they seem to actually manage to do, but others don't, and just made it more of a consistent program and said, look, okay, they can give money out, small amounts, but not much, so there's got to be a certain point, and where would they put the money in? They can go to Treasury and ask for money and they get it. What happens? And immediately I started to work through, I realised, well, the limitation here is going to be who are they going to give the money to? Because it would just be them deciding. So they'll work with their interests. And they'll work with their friends. And that does introduce some interesting things, because if you consider Admiral Jackson, who was Third Sea Lord 1905 to about 1908, when he's taken over by Jellicoe. He's a pioneer of radio, and he's friends with some of the people who were actually working on the early theories of radar and could never get funding to do their research. And so there's a very random opportunity that you actually end up with something like a radar, not a sort of a radar as in a radar which is, we sort of think about scanning radar or those sort of things. More of a radar rangefinder. Something which goes, this ship is this far away. It's a very simple system. You could build a radar to do that theoretically with the technology they have at the time, and if you're investing in it, you could. So it's not a radar which is searching for things. It's a radar which goes, boom, that target is this far away. That has an interesting impact on World War One, trust me. But that's starting in about 1905. If you're investing and giving them money, they could possibly get some, because that's basically that form of radar. By the way, is literally well, it's a broadcast and a receive, isn't it? You're literally it's like acting almost like sonar. You're sending out a pulse of radar. You're measuring for what you get back, and that's how you work out the distance. It's converting the time, the travel time, which you know how fast the radar goes and how fast it should be reflected, into something like a time equals distance, time travel sort of thing. That's not a massively complicated piece of technology. Compared to the radars you have in World War II, the radars of World War II are a different level beyond that. But they're both still radar. Why am I bringing this into this? Why don't they have that system? Well, they don't have that system because that sort of unaccountable spending is a problem. Because you might have good people in charge of it, you might have bad people. It's an easy thing to get conned. In the period we're talking about when they're looking at these ships and they're working them out, they're testing ideas out as well. Even Warrior is a test the ideas. Because if she's a response to Gloire, with the Royal Navy putting together this thing, this is what they need to respond to Gloire. If the French had then returned the response by going, oh, well, you've built Warrior, we're going to build something even bigger, well, the Royal Navy would have done that. But jumping in and doing that before they had to would have been overkill. Expense they didn't need to do. Fifth rate worked. The price point works again. So that, talking about that in terms of naval history and talking about price points, I want you to think about the 4th, 2nd and 4th rates. I've covered them in these videos. On paper, they look like a great compromise. But they're not at the right price points. They don't give you the value for money. The question today, and I know I paused a bit there, but that's because I rephrased the question in my head. The question today is simple. I want you to think about the ships of 5th rate and above, and their price points, and their value. And I want you to pick a nation which is a modern nation, which didn't, but imagine it existed in the late 18th century. And I want you to devise a fleet for it. I want you to think about what it could sustain. In real terms, what it could sustain as a fleet. What are the price points it can afford to bear? It might not be able to take any 1st rates. It might not be able to take any 3rd rates or any 5th rates. It might actually be better for them to have 4th rates and 5th rates. But I want you to think about it. Because that's an important thing for a nation when thinking about these things, is to think about what do they really need? What serves their interests? What's the value for them? What price is sufficient for them to pay? Because that's the other trouble with defence spending. You can spend too much. You need to buy enough to be viable. Enough to service your interests and protect your duties. But if you spend too much on buying the equipment of today, you might not have enough money to buy the equipment of tomorrow. Now, you can take that too far. You can always be going, but tomorrow it's going to be better, so I'll save my money for that. And you never have anything. It's a balancing act. Like everything in life. You can both overdo and underdo things. You can underdo exercise, you can overdo exercise. The correct thing is to get it right for you. You can overdo and undereat. Again, you need to get it right for you. And it's the same with defence spending, and it's the same with the naval structure. So I want you to think about these ships, and I want you to think about what structure would really suit. I don't know. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and hope you enjoyed. I'm going to leave you with HMS Warrior looking gorgeous.